Hi, my name is Elle, and I'm the host of the Mage System. So, you read the title. Why do DID systems never seem to divulge their trauma, especially online creators? Well, I have a pretty good answer, and it might not be what you're thinking. But firstly, I want to take a look at why people want to know so bad. Because it's sort of an open secret that people do want to know. People's curiosity is natural, and it's hard to control the thought of being curious, though I'm sure singlets are more curious about it than systems themselves. It's not a good thought, but we don't always have good thoughts. We as a society are somewhat obsessed with morbidity and the unknown. True crime videos and internet mysteries are such a booming genre on YouTube for a reason. Humans have a natural curiosity and a guilty indulgence in exploring the darkest aspects of our species, and this includes trauma. And DID systems, to many, hold the stereotype as having the darkest and most extreme trauma, which is a stereotype that I absolutely hate. I could go off the rails about that, but this video has a purpose, and I don't want to say the same things I've said a million times before. Before I begin, I want to offer a trigger warning because some of the ideas I'm going to share here and phrasing I'm going to use when discussing childhood trauma are very blunt. I'm not going to mention any specific type of abuse, but I'm going to talk about abuse and neglect, and particularly the culture surrounding how we talk about that. And some of the language I'm going to use to get my point across is going to be candid and potentially emotionally evocative. There will also be discussion of self hurting at one point, but I'll put a timestamp to skip that whenever we get there so that you can still watch this video. So, with all the curiosity, you'd think people with DID would hop on the train of talking about trauma because they know people want to hear it, and who doesn't like being listened to? And who doesn't like a little extra money? But if we're being honest, the answer seems obvious, right? It's clearly very re traumatizing to speak of. I mean, if this trauma is intense to cause a child to split into multiple people to cope with, it's probably not going to be the most emotionally stable storytime video. And obviously, well, it's personal. But just saying it's personal doesn't give a reason necessarily. It gives a reason why there doesn't need to be a reason. It's a vague way of saying because it's private. And it most definitely is, and rightfully so. But here, I'm asking why it's private. For a particular person, not only are we not entitled to know their trauma, we're also not entitled to know why they don't share it, which means that aside from the content of the secret, the act of not sharing is a secretive thing itself. Secrets are something that, if not kept solely for damage control, functionality, or some other purely logical reason, are most of the time rooted in embarrassment or shame. In our society, things we are expected to keep private include our biggest regrets, deepest fears, wildest fantasies, most humiliating memories, our naked body. These things are shameful and embarrassing when they're on public display because they make us feel vulnerable. Our most intimate qualities are subjected to the eyes of everyone who knows you. The fact that DID systems were traumatized is something that makes us look vulnerable, especially with the taboo nature of some types of trauma, the taboo nature of abuse. And I think there's something much deeper to this topic. The trauma of DID systems. People think they want to hear, but actually speaking about childhood trauma is socially prohibited. I'm sure almost every survivor of a certain type of trauma has experienced a time where they opened up to someone about it and they were just met with that person being kind of grossed out or being dismissive because they just didn't want to talk about that sort of thing, or a sympathetic response that leaves you feeling unheard, like, oh, I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine what that's like. I don't really know what to say. Mm. It seems so simple, but there are so many layers to the trauma of talking about your trauma that I haven't even been able to understand them all as someone who's had this experience. And this next part is going to be important, but emotionally difficult for some, so you can skip 20 seconds or so if you like. People do not want to imagine children being hurt in this way. They want to ignore a part of reality because the hard truth that we don't want to accept in our society is that some children, probably several you've walked past in the grocery store in your life, are abused and badly traumatized. It's not just the people who have had secure childhoods who fall into this denial and ignorance. It's us who have been hurt as well. DID wouldn't even be a thing if we could all just accept some of the things that have happened to us. The point of it all is to section off feelings, information, memories, and experiences so that the body could continue the demands of existing, sleeping, feeling, thinking, breathing. We do not want to accept the reality that a human could be so pushed to stay afloat in this body, in this life, that their brain infracted into pieces. When I was 14, I was homeschooled. Before, I was a healthy kid. I was clever, I was thoughtful. Maybe I had a lot of social anxiety and insecurity, but I was seemingly just a normal girl. I went to school until 8th grade. The day I turned 13, I started to feel different. Just different. I left school and homeschooled instead. I didn't care for my peers anymore. I made many attempts to describe it. I have fragments of my documented experience here and there from then, but a lot of it is lost to time. I found one fragment in my notes. It read, "I feel like I don't belong here. I feel so empty." You know when people say to take a step back and analyze your situation? Well, I haven't left that step back. In fact, I don't even know how. At some point, to cope with my depression, isolation, and fear of my own mind, I started having deep addictions to SH and SI. The reason I told you all of that is because I felt so guilty then. Because some of the girls I had socialized with told me that they were abused by someone once, or I knew they had very apparent issues with their family, but I was the one that was losing their mind. Or so I was convinced. I was the one ripping my body like I was a dang block of cheese. Uh, I didn't think I had any trauma. I had no excuse to be this screwed up. I didn't deserve the label of depressed. I mean, there were those things, just those things that happened, but that has to be it. Nothing more. And that's just nothing. Like, it's just some embarrassing stuff. I'll never tell anyone that. Eventually, after an episode of hypomania brought on by an antidepressant I started back then, I finally did make a good couple of friends. They started confiding in me about their trauma, and soon I realized that I had some of that good. I had some fun blasts from the past, and I was not alone. I discovered what depersonalization derealization disorder was, and finally realized I'm probably not going completely crackers. I think. I was still terrified of my unrecognized plurality. Though I continued to be depressed for years and years, I got anorexia and bulimia and stuff. My relationship with accepting my trauma stayed in that same place for a long time. I knew I had it, and on paper, it was bad. But I didn't feel like it was. I felt like I was an imposter. Even after eventually discovering we had DID, even after getting diagnosed with it, when did we finally realize that it was bad enough? Like a week ago. We're okay, I think. I think I couldn't accept it until we were in a better headspace to tackle that understanding, and we are still not in an A1 headspace, but really picking apart my resistance to accept my system as a host and trying to figure out a way I can has helped me to understand this reality. I was too traumatized to accept we were traumatized. Accepting you are traumatized, and other kiddos were too, is traumatizing because trauma is traumatizing, and pretending it doesn't exist shields you from that. Not really. It isn't just that society turns a blind eye to trauma, more specifically, the traumatization of children. It's us children as well, in our own ways. This might be a bad time to have to make this interjection, but I accidentally broke my lamp. Um, I'm just gonna pretend like I'm not totally freaked out right now. It's okay, I can get a new one. Yay, ruined! The lamp was stupid anyway. Not true. I don't know what to... Should I just leave it there? I'm not even worthy of perceiving light. I don't deserve lamps. I'm a good person. As a host, I told myself I was over it. The trauma, that is, not the lamp. Being someone who makes content online, who is open about having a traumagenic disorder, is hard. I do not like the image of trauma being projected onto me. I do not like people looking at me and picturing the face of a child who was abused. I don't like seeing that face. That's uncomfortable. This is uncomfortable. Right now. What I'm saying. In my real life, I barely disclose we have DID. Even with the people who do know, I never talk about it. We always mask when we switch, and I sometimes just wish they'd forget that I'd ever told them. It's the shame of having DID, but it's more than that. When you tell someone you have DID, you're not just telling them you have DID. You're telling them something else. Self-disclosure comes in levels. Superficial self-disclosure, the first level, is casual conversation every day that you'd have in an elevator that has nothing to do with you, like the weather. Mild self-disclosure is stuff you might talk about with an Uber driver, like where you work, your major, your hobbies. Moderate self-disclosure is things like your religion, political beliefs, whether you've been in love, stuff you share with a casual friend that you're just hanging out with for the first time. Deep self-disclosure is stuff that you share with your closest friends and lovers, or your therapist. These things are details about your breakups, your flaws and fears, things like that. Then there is the lockbox. Details of events that happened to you or which you were a part of in some way that you hold secret. Your deepest unresolved pains or shame. This is the stuff you might tell only one or two people in your lifetime. Maybe stuff you'll never tell anyone. When you disclose you have DID, that, for most people, would fall into deep self-disclosure, depending on your system's philosophy about it. However, it implies something that's in your lockbox, your trauma. A while back, I did a Q&A on my channel, and I got this one question that I didn't answer. If you're in a situation, hopefully safe, where you have a good relationship with your parents/family of origin, and if they didn't contribute to the condition, what do they think about your having DID and how many are actually supportive? I've thought about this a lot. I'm still thinking about it. And firstly, I know a lot of you already know this, but your parents or family of origin had to have contributed to you getting DID. To get DID, I'm not trying to sell it to you. I do not recommend. One needs repeated trauma that is too intense for a child to comprehend or handle, and a disorganized attachment from the primary caregivers. This disorganized attachment causes the child to never be completely sure of how their primary caregivers are going to react. They live in an unpredictable environment, and this is a recipe for alters forming, because often each alter has a different opinion of the primary caregivers. One alter may fear them, some might act out to get their attention, some might be angry at them, and some might really cling on to them. What is really important about this disorganized attachment, though, is that the primary caregivers were not available to soothe the child after they experienced their major trauma, or they may have even inflicted it. The child is not taught to cope. Secondly, I've never really talked about this on my channel before, mostly because if anyone ever somehow finds my identity and then somehow finds my parents' identities, I don't want them to have all of this negative information on them. I could see why people would think I would have an okay relationship with my family. I've made a video before about how it's technically possible to have a good relationship with your parents and have DID. and I generally don't think I give the vibe that I have a lot of trouble with my folks nowadays. Okay. Here's what I'll say. My mother knows that I have DID. Now, not to launch into a whole story time, but I'll say she definitely did not believe me. I told her very soon after I found out, and eventually she was forced to believe me because I got diagnosed. She doesn't like to think about it, and whenever I occasionally bring it up, she barely says anything. The alters do not feel comfortable around her, and it's a shame because I have a little one who really loves her. That alter is beginning to realize that my mother is not the nurturing cocoon he always thought, because that source of comfort is slowly being transferred to what the other system members can provide. My father, on the other hand, does not and will never know, not unless I become a big psychologist one day who openly has DID and writes a book about it, like I always dreamed of since I was 16. I do not think my father would believe me, even though I've gotten diagnosed. And I'm just now realizing that, even if he did, I think he would in some way see it as my fault. Like I was just sensitive or something. That's why I'm like this and have had all of the issues that I've had. Shout out to my brother though. He's the real G. He knows, believes me, I'm sure, and does not give a shit. And that's just fine. He is. He is. Before I proceed, I want to give you my philosophy on sharing my trauma with you all. I will occasionally imply consistent issues I've had throughout my childhood, and I kind of have, but I'm not going to get into major repeated events, and I'm not going to talk about it for the sake of talking about it. I think there have been times where I have been very quick to divulge information that later, thinking back on it, I get this weird feeling that I'm now realizing is probably me being uncomfortable with how much I shared, whether it's that I have DID or important personal information or interesting details about something that I probably should have still kept to myself, even though they're interesting, and I just don't realize that I'm uncomfortable with it at the time, and then later I feel weird about it. And I think that it can lead people to judge me, compare themselves to me. It can lead people to feeling like I have low standards for myself because I disclosed so much so quickly. And it can ruin the illusion of mysteriosity that I like to have around just like my peers, I guess, because that makes people drawn to you. It makes people want to talk to you unless you're so mysterious that you're scary. And it makes people want to be your friend and get to know you, and it makes them like you. And whenever you say too much about yourself, it can make people sort of lose interest in you, which is unfortunate. And I feel like whenever you share really intimate details about yourself to a bigger, more open space, it sort of makes those details not yours anymore, or at least part of it. And I think for some people that can be helpful for certain DID systems or trauma survivors to share their information because it takes some of the power out of it and it releases some of that out into the world. And so I don't want to say as a blanket statement that no DID systems like to talk about their trauma or that it's never helpful for anybody, because if there's one thing I want everyone to know on my channel, it's that there is nuance to everything, and everyone is different, and no one thing is going to apply to everybody. And so, yeah, there are definitely DID systems who probably feel better after talking and telling more people about their trauma. And so, yeah, everybody's path is different. My parents nowadays are okay people for their demographic. My dad is a intelligent, Joe Rogan watching grumpy guy with narcissistic tendencies who could probably help you with taking apart a car. Something, I don't know anything about that. He could probably give you advice on something like a computer issue, but I avoid sharing anything with him of a meaningful nature that is not surface level. He does not have very much empathy. I just remembered I broke the lamp again. My mother is an also intelligent, workaholic, and robotic person. Specifically in the latter years of my youth, she was about 35% of the time attentive and an effectively nurturing mother. However, the other 65% of the time, if I can do math, she was inattentive and dismissive, which almost fucks with your head more than being all the way one way or the other. There's much more than that, but that's a simple rundown of how they are these days. A much more keyed down, healthier version of who they used to be. And I'm a little proud of them. And I'm proud of you for sticking it out, because if you're here watching my channel, you're probably here because you have a lot of trauma. And not only do I love that for you, I also love that you've joined me here today to talk about these hardships from a bird's eye view, because I think that's important whenever we can get lost in the past so easily. And I just wanted to say that from the bottom of my confused soul, thank you for watching. And I want to tell you how much I appreciate you now, in case the clouds of derealization come over me again. But I think we're getting better though.